You even got a call sign, ma'am? Or do they just call you Clipboard? The words bounced off the high steel of the hangar and came back flattened, the way everything did in that bay, and the two young pilots behind Captain Tate Hollis laughed right on cue. One of them lifted a phone. The morning was already thick with heat, the rolled-up doors at the far end framing a white rectangle of apron where the air shimmered over the concrete, and the smell of jet fuel and hot metal sat over everything like a lid. 6 Hornets stood in a row down the length of the bay, panels open, red flags hanging from their pitot tubes, rolling toolboxes parked at their flanks. And in the middle of it all stood a woman in a plain red shirt with a visitor badge clipped at her collar and a clipboard in her hand. And she did not look up. She set the tip of her pen against the line she was reading and did not lose her place. "Come on," Hollis said, drifting a step closer, hands loose at his sides, performing now for the 2 lieutenants more than for her. "Everybody on this flight line's got one. What's yours? Safety? Paperwork?" He grinned. "Inspector Clipboard. That's a good one. We'll go with that." The woman wrote a single word on her form. She was perhaps 40, lean, unremarkable in the way that a person can choose to be unremarkable, her hair pulled back, her face giving nothing away. To everyone in the hangar, she was exactly what the badge said she was. A civilian, a safety inspector, somebody's scheduled inconvenience sent down to walk the floor and write people up for missing eye protection. Nobody looks twice at the civilian with the clipboard. That was the entire point of the civilian with the clipboard. There was a thing she had learned a long time ago, in a different life, about the value of being underestimated. You learned more about a unit in 20 quiet minutes of being nobody than in 20 days of being announced. People showed you who they were when they thought you did not matter. So she had come down to the hangar the way she had come, in a red shirt and a borrowed badge, a few days ahead of the change of command, to see the squadron she was about to take as it actually was, and not as it would arrange itself to look the moment the new commanding officer walked in. She had not expected to enjoy it. She had not expected the boy. She had done it this way once before, years ago, at another squadron, and an old colonel she admired had told her it was the only honest look a commander ever got. "After you take command," he had said, "you will never again see your people the way they really are. They will see you coming. The good ones will stand a little straighter, and the nervous ones will hide their mistakes, and the whole machine will arrange itself into the shape it thinks you want. The only true picture you will ever get is the one you steal before they know your face. So steal it. Walk the line as a nobody. Watch how they treat the person they think can do nothing for them and nothing to them, because that, not the way they treat you, is who they actually are." She had taken the lesson to heart, and this morning, in a borrowed badge and a red shirt, she was getting exactly the honest look the old colonel had promised her, and most of what she was seeing was good. Sharp maintainers, a tight flight line, a chief who knew his Marines, and then there was the boy, who was busy showing her precisely who he was when he thought she was no one at all. What none of them noticed was that when the auxiliary power unit on the next jet over spun up with a shriek that made the youngest maintainer wince and turn his head, she did not flinch. Not a flicker. Her hand had come to rest flat against the airframe beside her, and it had landed, without her looking, exactly on the seam where the access panel latched, the way a hand finds a familiar doorknob in the dark. Across the bay, at the discrepancy board where the day's open write-ups hung in their plastic sleeves, Master Sergeant Dominic Ferraro stopped reading. He was a big man going gray at the temples, a maintenance chief with 26 years on flight lines from Cherry Point to Kandahar, and he had been only half listening to the captain show off. But he had seen the hand. He had seen the way it found the latch. Civilians did not touch a jet like that. Civilians touched a jet like it might bite them. This woman touched it like she owned it. He did not say anything. He watched. Hollis was not used to being ignored. He was a good-looking young captain with a good-looking young captain's certainty, 2 years into flying the Hornet, and convinced that made him the most interesting man in any room he walked into. The silence the woman gave him was not the flustered silence he expected. It was the silence of someone waiting for a child to finish. "Hey." He snapped his fingers, once near her shoulder. "I'm talking to you." "I heard you," the woman said. She still did not look up. Her voice was low and even and entirely without heat. "You should fix that panel before you sign it off." She tapped the open avionics bay twice with 2 fingers, capped her pen, and walked to the next aircraft in the row. And Captain Tate Hollis, robbed of the reaction he had come for, glanced at his lieutenants, set his jaw, and followed her down the line. She had stopped at the open panel of the second Hornet, and she was crouched now, balanced easily on the balls of her feet, pointing at something inside without touching it. "This fastener's not torqued," she said, "to no one and to everyone. And there's a safety wire missing here. You don't close this panel and sign it green. Not like this." A young maintainer, a lance corporal who had been pretending to coil a hose, went very still. Because she was right. He had closed that panel. He had not torqued that fastener. He had been about to sign it off. "Okay," Hollis said, coming up behind her, recovering his momentum, deciding to make this a lesson he taught instead of one he watched. "Sweetheart, let me help you out, because I actually fly these. That's not even a structural fastener, all right? That panel's avionics access. The torque spec on that is nothing. You could close it with your fingers. So before you go writing up my Marines, it's a primary fastener on that panel," the woman said. She had not raised her voice. She had not turned around. 40 inch-pounds, then safety wire. It's in the publication. Check your pubs, Captain. The lance corporal looked at the open panel. He looked at the woman. Then he looked, helplessly, at Master Sergeant Ferraro, who had drifted 10 feet closer without anyone marking him. "Move." Ferraro had heard a great many people talk about aircraft in his life. He had heard pilots talk, and contractors talk, and inspectors talk, and politicians talk. And he knew, the way you know a song from its first 2 notes, the difference between a person who had read about a jet and a person who had bled in one. The woman in the red shirt talked like the second kind. She did not reach for the words. The words were already hers. She had said the torque value the way you say your own phone number, and she had said it without checking, without the small upward flick of the eyes that people make when they are pulling a fact out of memory and hoping it is the right one. She simply knew. The knowing was old in her. He watched her stand and move down the airframe, and he watched the way she moved. She did not wander. She walked the jet the way a pilot walks a jet on a pre-flight, nose to tail, a route, her eyes touching each point in an order, her lips moving very slightly, as though she were counting something only she could hear. She put her palm on the leading edge. She glanced up under the wing at the stores stations. She crouched once to look at the nose gear, and the crouch was a pilot's crouch, the unconscious dip of someone who has done it 10,000 times in the dark before a brief. She looked at the tires the way a person looks at tires when she has felt a bad one shudder a landing and never wants to feel it again. Ferraro's eyes went to the visitor badge at her collar, then to her hands, then to the way she held her shoulders, and a cold thought arrived in him fully formed. It was not the thought that she was a fraud. It was the precise opposite. It was the thought that the woman the captain was calling Inspector Clipboard was not a civilian at all, and that everyone in this hangar was about to find out the hard way. There was something else, too, tugging at the back of his mind, something he could not yet pull to the front. A flight line a long way away. A red dawn and a wounded jet, and a person walking back from it alone. He could not see the face in the memory, but he could see the walk. And the walk was here, in his hangar, in a red shirt. He opened his mouth, and then Captain Hollis, who could not stand to be corrected in front of his lieutenants twice in 5 minutes, decided to put the civilian in her place. "You know what? That's enough," Hollis announced, loud enough now to pull the whole bay's attention, which was what he wanted. He turned, arms spreading, playing to the floor like a man on a stage. "Gather round, gentlemen. We are privileged this morning. We have a real live expert on the flight line. Inspector Clipboard here is going to teach us all how to maintain our own aircraft." First Lieutenant Errol Cassidy, 26 and eager to be liked, laughed and stepped in. "Careful, sir," he said. "She might write you up." "Oh, she might," Hollis agreed. "She might write me up. You hear that, Inspector? You gonna write me up?" The phone was still up. The second lieutenant filming had a grin on his face. Hollis leaned in toward the woman, put one hand flat on the fuselage beside her head, blocking her line down the airframe, crowding the space the way a bigger animal crowds a smaller one. "Because here's the thing. This is my flight line. These are my Marines. And I don't think you know the first thing about—" The woman stepped around his arm. Not fast, not flustered. She simply wasn't where his arm had been. And then she was reading the next panel, and his hand was resting on bare metal, beside nobody at all. She had not touched him. She had not acknowledged him. She had moved through the space he was using to intimidate her, the way water moves around a stone. And the not flinching of it, the complete absence of fear, landed on the watching Marine stranger than any argument could have. Fear they would have understood. They saw fear from civilians on the flight line all the time. This was the absence of it, total and easy, and it unsettled them more than they could have said. "You don't have to make this a thing," she said mildly, still reading. "I'll be done in 20 minutes and you'll never see me again." It was almost kind. It was the tone of a person giving someone a last exit, and Hollis, who did not recognize an off-ramp when he was handed one, heard it as weakness. The maintainers stopped laughing first. They had watched her catch 2 real discrepancies on 2 different jets in under 5 minutes, and enlisted Marines who turn wrenches all day have a very fast nose for who actually knows the aircraft and who is performing. One of them, a corporal, had quietly gone to the second jet and put a Torx wrench on the fastener she had flagged, and had felt it turn, under-torqued, exactly as she had said, and had said nothing, but had looked at her differently from that moment on. Word travels fast on a flight line, faster than any order ever could. By the time the woman had reached the third jet, half the maintainers in the bay knew that the civilian had quietly caught 3 real discrepancies. The captain's own walkarounds had strolled right past, and the knowledge moved through the ranks like a shift in the weather, a pressure drop you feel before you can name it. A staff sergeant near the tail of the line stopped wiping his hands on a rag and simply stood, watching her work. The way a man watches someone do a thing he had thought only a few people in the world could actually do. A plane captain elbowed the Marine beside him and nodded toward her, and neither of them said a word. But the message passed all the same. That one's not what the captain thinks. Ferraro's jaw was set hard now. The officers kept laughing. That was the line in the hangar, and you could have drawn it with chalk. The people who worked on the jets had gone quiet, and the people who thought they owned them had not. If you have ever watched the loud, forget what the quiet ones have already paid, stay with this one, and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. Hollis felt the floor turning on him, the laughter thinning, and instead of reading it for what it was, he did what men like Hollis do. He reached for authority. "All right, I want to see that badge," he said, and his voice had changed. The performance was gone out of it. Something harder had come in. Visitor badge, no escort, standing right next to a multi-million-dollar aircraft. That's a problem. That's actually a security problem. Hand it here." The woman regarded him for a moment. Then, unhurried, she unclipped the badge and held it out. And the calm with which she did it should have warned him. People who are bluffing do not move that slowly. People who have something to hide do not look you in the eye while they hand you the very thing they are hiding. "There's a worn tire on the third jet," she said, while he made a show of squinting at the badge. "Right main, past limits on the inboard shoulder, and a streaked seal on the centerline tank. You've got a slow weep there. Somebody wiped it down, but it's still coming. You'll want both of those before you fly them, not after." "I didn't ask about the tires." Hollis turned the badge over in his fingers, like it might be counterfeit. He could not read it. Quite. The lamination caught the light, and rather than admit that, he made his face into something official. "Cassidy, go get the duty NCO. I want her walked off. Civilian with a bad attitude and a fake-looking badge doesn't get to stand on my flight line and lecture my maintainers." He looked up at her, and there was real meanness in it now. The meanness of a small man who has found a lever. "You shouldn't even be standing next to that aircraft." Cassidy hesitated. For just a second, the lieutenant's eyes went to the maintainers, to the quiet that had come over them, to the corporal still standing by the second jet with a torque wrench in his hand, and something in the boy's face said that he, at least, had begun to feel the ground move. But Hollis snapped his name again, and habit won, and Cassidy went. The bay had gone quiet around them, uneasy. The maintainers did not like it. You could see them not liking it, shifting, looking at the deck. But none of them was going to step between a captain and the thing the captain had decided to do. Rank is rank, and a lance corporal does not save a civilian from a captain, however much he might want to. Master Sergeant Ferraro stepped off the discrepancy board and started across the floor. And the woman in the red shirt finally lowered her clipboard and lifted her eyes and looked Captain Tate Hollis full in the face for the first time. It was not a civilian's look. There was no fear in it, and no anger in it, and no appeal in it. It was the level, weighing, unhurried look of someone who has looked at far worse things than an angry young man and outlasted all of them. And for just a second, just one. Hollis felt it land, and something behind his certainty wobbled. He had seen eyes like that before on the senior pilots he was secretly afraid of, the ones who had been to the places he had only trained for. He pushed the feeling down. He could not afford it, not here, not with the camera up. Then Ferraro arrived. The master sergeant came in low and direct and quiet, putting his bulk at an angle that turned him slightly away from the lieutenants, so the words were for the captain alone. "Captain Hollis," he said, "stand down." "Sir, I'm asking you to stand down." Hollis laughed, surprised. "Master Sergeant, I don't know what you think you're—" "You do not know who that is." Ferraro kept his voice flat and low, but there was iron under it, the iron of a man who has earned the right to say a hard thing to an officer and is spending that right now, on purpose, knowing the cost. "I'm telling you, I am asking you, walk away from this. Right now. Hand the lady her badge back and walk away, and you will be glad for the rest of your career that you did. I have been doing this a long time, sir. I am not wrong about this." For a moment, something flickered in Hollis's face, because a master sergeant does not talk like that for nothing, and some animal part of him knew it. A maintenance chief with gray in his hair did not put his career on the line to protect a random civilian. The math of it did not work, and Hollis was just smart enough to feel that the math did not work, even if he could not solve it. But the lieutenants were watching. The phone was watching. And a captain cannot be told what to do by an enlisted man in front of his lieutenants and still be the most interesting man in the room. "Get back to work, Master Sergeant," Hollis said. That's an order. This doesn't concern you." It was the worst sentence he would ever say. Ferraro's eyes had gone again to the woman's right forearm, and to the way she stood with her weight settled and even, and the certainty in him had hardened all the way through. He knew that stance. He had finally pulled the old memory to the front, and it had a face on it now. He knew exactly who this was, and he knew the boy was about to put his hands on her. The woman did not move. She let the silence stretch, and the stillness of her, the deep, settled, patient stillness, was not the stillness of a cornered civilian. It was the stillness of someone who had once held far worse than a loud room, who had held a thing so heavy that nothing a captain could do to her would ever weigh the same. She had decided, somewhere in the last minute, that she would let this run a little further, not out of cruelty, out of a kind of grim curiosity, the way you let a young pilot fly himself to the edge of a mistake in the simulator because the lesson he teaches himself there is the only kind that ever sticks. What the boy in the flight suit did not know is what the next 2 minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Her eyes dropped, just for a moment, to the tail of the nearest Hornet, to the squadron markings there, to the long, clean lines of it, and the hangar fell away, and the year wasn't this year, and the place wasn't this place. It was Helmand. It was a night 10 years gone, and she was 31 years old, and she was strapped into the front seat of an FA-18 with the desert dark sliding away beneath her at 400 knots, and a voice in her ears that was still alive. The call had come in the way the bad ones always came in, fast and clipped and edged with something the radio could not quite hide. A reconnaissance team was pinned in a dry wadi, 800 meters from a compound. Ammunition almost gone, no way out. The enemy closing the distance in the dark. Troops in contact. Those were the 3 words that turned a routine night into the only night that mattered. The 3 words that pulled every tired pilot in the stack wide awake. "Eagle 6, came the call. "We need you now. We need you danger close." She had been Eagle 6 for 2 years by then. It had been just a call sign. Then, a name, a thing painted under her canopy rail, a word the tower said. It had not yet become the other thing it would become before the sun came up. In the back seat, her weapons systems officer, Captain Silas Renner, ran the numbers fast and clean the way he always did, and his voice when it came over the intercom was careful. He was the calmest man she had ever flown with, a man who narrated emergencies in the same tone he ordered coffee, and she had come to trust that voice more than she trusted her own. "Eagle 6, he said. "They're danger close. That's 200 meters from friendlies. Closer, maybe, by the time we're in. You sure about this?" "I'm sure," she said. "Hold on." "Always am," Renner said, and she heard the small, dry smile in it. And that was the last ordinary thing. She rolled the jet onto its side and brought it down. Down past where the book said to be. Down into the black where the muzzle flashes were stitching the dark below in long, ragged lines. Low enough to put the gun exactly where it had to go, and nowhere else, because 200 meters is the distance at which a mistake does not miss the enemy. It kills the men you came to save. She felt the airframe shudder around her, felt the airframe come alive in her hands the way it did when she asked too much of it. She felt Renner's breathing in her ears, steady, trusting her, calling the corrections, his voice walking her eye onto the target. Left of the compound, the wadi line. They're in the bend. You're going to be threading it. And then, when she had it, when the pipper sat exactly where 10 years of training said it had to sit, you're cleared hot, Eagle 6, and she pressed it in and put 20 millimeters of fire down the length of that ridgeline so precisely that the recon team would later say it walked right up to their position and stopped, like a wall coming down between them and the dark. She could still feel the buzz of the gun in her teeth. She could still feel the climb out, the G pressing her into the seat, The relief that lasted exactly 1.5 seconds. The team lived. All of them. 13 men who walked out of that wadi because Eagle 6 came down lower than she should have and did not miss. And on the egress, climbing out, the jet took a hit. She never saw exactly what it was. A lucky burst from the ground. A round that found the one place a round should never find. The one seam in all that armor and engineering where chance could reach a human being. The aircraft bucked, and the warning tones screamed, and the master caution lit the cockpit up red, and she fought it level with both hands and both feet, every muscle she had, and she called back over the intercom for the corrections that would get them home. Renner did not answer. She called his name. She called his call sign. She told him to talk to her, to give her a number, to give her anything. She flew a wounded jet 200 miles through the dark, with the controls fighting her the whole way, and the back seat silent behind her. And she did not stop calling his name until the wheels were down, because as long as she was calling him, she did not have to know. As long as there was a next thing to do, trim the jet, nurse the engine, talk to the tanker, talk to the tower, hold the center line. She did not have to turn around and look. So she did the next thing, and the next, all the way home. And she held it together, because there were 200 miles of next things between her and the truth, and she used every one of them. They gave her the Distinguished Flying Cross for that night. They stood her up in front of the wing, and they read the citation aloud. The wadi, the 13 men, the run pressed danger close under fire, and they pinned the cross on her chest. And the whole time, she was standing at attention, thinking about the back seat, about the silence in it, about the last clear word in her ears before the world went wrong. The call sign Eagle 6, which had just been hers before that night, became something the wing said with a particular weight afterward. The way people say a name that has cost something. The way a unit says the name of an operation it does not talk about at the bar. She wore the weight of it every day since. She wore it the way you wear a thing that is yours and that you would give anything to put down and never can. Her squadron commander that night, the man who had launched her, who had been on the radio when she came home, who had stood beside the ambulance on the ramp in the red dawn, had been a lieutenant colonel named Beckett Lyon. He had not said anything to her on the ramp. He had just put a hand on her shoulder once and left it there, and that had been the only thing in the world that helped. There had been a funeral after. There had been a flag folded into a hard triangle and handed across to a woman in Renner's family, who looked enough like him that Asher had to look away. There had been letters she made herself write, and a sea bag she made herself help pack, and a back seat she had to climb into again, 3 weeks later, because the only way through the thing was through it. And a squadron does not stop flying because it is grieving. She had strapped into the front of a jet with a new WSO behind her, a good kid, terrified and trying not to show it. And she had felt the empty weight of who was not there, and she had flown the mission, and she had landed, and she had done it again the next day and the day after that. That was the part nobody put in a citation. The cross was for the 40 seconds of the run. The rest of it, the climbing back in every day, with the silence still riding in the back seat. There was no medal shaped like that. There never would be. It was the kind of thing you carried where no one could see it, and you did not set it down, because setting it down would have felt like leaving him in the wadi, and she would sooner have flown into the ground. The last thing she remembered, before the hangar came back, was Renner's voice on the intercom in the half-second before the run. Clear, dry, alive. Saying you're cleared hot, Eagle 6. And then the heat and the noise and the present came crashing back in, and there was a young captain's hand closing around her arm. "Let's go," Hollis was saying. "Off my flight line. Come on." He had taken her by the upper arm. His grip was firm and proprietary, and entirely sure of itself. and he turned her bodily toward the rolled-up doors and the white blaze of the apron beyond, marching her like a shoplifter toward the exit, narrating it over his shoulder for the camera and the laugh. There she goes. Say goodbye to Inspector Clipboard. Maybe next time she'll read the visitor brief before she... The woman let him move her. That was the thing the maintainers saw, the thing they would talk about for the rest of their lives, in ready rooms and on smoke breaks and at reunions 30 years on. She let him. She went where his hand pushed her, balanced and unbothered, her feet finding the floor easily, her body soft and cooperative in a way that had nothing to do with surrender. And every Marine on that hangar deck who knew anything about how bodies move under stress understood in that moment that she could have stopped it, that she could have taken the wrist and the elbow and put him on the concrete in the space between two breaths and chosen, instead, to be walked to the door. The choosing was louder than any violence would have been. Violence they could have explained. This calm, this terrible patient willingness to be handled, told them something about what she was that made the hair stand up on their arms. For one beat, her free hand settled at her side, and her weight came down through the center of her, and her chin came level, and it was the smallest thing, a shift you would have missed if you were not looking for it. But Master Sergeant Ferraro was looking for it, because he had seen that exact settling before, on that exact person, on a flight line on the other side of the world, in a red dawn, 10 years gone. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice cracked on it, the discipline of 26 years failing him for 1 second. "Colonel," he caught himself, but the word was out, hanging in the hot air of the bay. "Colonel." First Lieutenant Cassidy's grin died on his face. The lance corporal with the hose looked up. The corporal with the torque wrench took a step forward without knowing he had. The second lieutenant lowered the phone an inch, frowning, as though the picture had stopped making sense, as though the story he was filming had just changed genre on him, and he did not yet know to what. Hollis did not hear it, or did not let himself hear it. He had her at the threshold now, the daylight white and total behind them, his hand still locked around her arm, one more step to the line where the hangar floor became the apron, and he had no idea in the world, that he was in the act of physically throwing the incoming commanding officer of the squadron off her own flight line, in front of a phone, in front of her Marines. Out on the apron, beyond the doors, a staff car had rolled to a stop. Its engine ticked in the heat. A door opened and shut, with the particular solid sound of a heavy door closing, and the sound carried into the bay in the half-second of quiet between one jet's power cart cycling down and the next coming up. And into that quiet, a new voice came. It came from the doors, from the white rectangle of light, and it did not have to be loud, because it was the kind of voice that the body obeys before the mind has finished hearing it. A man had walked in out of the glare, a full colonel in service uniform, the eagles bright on his collar, an aide a half-step behind him, and the squadron's leadership filing in at his back, the operations officer, the sergeant major, all of them come for the morning's reception of the new commanding officer. And the colonel had stopped dead, 3 steps inside his own hangar, at the sight of a captain marching a woman in a red shirt toward the door. For one frozen instant, the room read his rank before it read his face, the eagles catching the light, every spine in the bay beginning to straighten on reflex. Then the room read his face, and his face was thunder. Colonel Beckett Lyon had been a lieutenant colonel 10 years before in Helmand, commanding a squadron of Hornets, the night one of his pilots came home with a dead man in the back seat and 13 living men on the ground who owed her everything. He had read that citation himself. He had pinned that cross on her himself. He had stood beside the ambulance in the red dawn and put his hand on her shoulder because there were no words, and he had known there were no words. He knew the woman in the red shirt the way you know the people you have stood beside on the worst nights of your life. And he knew, in the space of a single heartbeat, exactly what he was looking at, and exactly what was being done to her, and by whom. He came to attention first, before his aide, before the sergeant major, before anyone in the bay had understood what was happening. The senior man in the hangar drew himself up to his full height and squared his shoulders and snapped to attention, his heels coming together with a crack, and his voice rang the length of the steel. "Attention on deck," Colonel Lyon said. "That is Eagle 6. That is your incoming commanding officer." For 1/2 second, nothing moved, and then Master Sergeant Ferraro, who had been waiting his whole morning for permission, filled his lungs and roared it across the bay in the voice that turns 100 Marines into a single thing. "On your feet. Attention on deck." The hangar came up like a wave. Every maintainer, every Marine on that deck, every wrench turner and plane captain and clerk dropped what they held and came to rigid attention, boots crashing on the concrete in a single ragged thunderclap that rolled down the bay and came back off the doors, the 6 Hornets standing over them now like an honor guard of steel. The 2 lieutenants snapped up so fast and so straight that the phone clattered to the floor and lay there, still filming the ceiling, still recording the high, cold light. First, Lieutenant Cassidy went white and rose to attention with his eyes fixed on the middle distance, unable to look at anything at all. The corporal set his torque wrench down on the toolbox with exaggerated care and came to attention beside it like a man at a graveside. And Captain Tate Hollis stood frozen in the center of all of it, with his hand still locked around the arm of the incoming commanding officer of the squadron. His face did the whole journey at once, and the watching Marines saw every station of it. The smirk was still half on it, left over from a joke that no longer existed, a joke from a world that had ended 10 seconds ago. Then came the confusion, the eyes ticking from the colonel to Ferraro, to the standing hangar and back, trying to assemble a story that would let this not be happening, trying to find the version where he was still right. Then the disbelief, as the words, Eagle 6 and commanding officer arrived in him and could not be pushed back out, could not be unheard. Then recognition, total and sickening, the understanding of exactly what he had done, and exactly who had watched him do it, and exactly what was on the phone on the floor. And then horror, plain horror, draining the color from his face from the top down like water leaving a glass, as his hand sprang open and released her arm as though it had gone suddenly red hot. The woman in the red shirt straightened her collar. She bent, unhurried, and picked up the visitor badge from where it had fallen and clipped it neatly back into place. She rolled her shoulders once, and the unremarkable civilian was simply gone, the way a coat comes off, and what stood in the white light of the hangar doors was unmistakably and entirely the most senior person in the building. It was extraordinary how little she had to change. A set of the shoulders, a lift of the chin. The same woman, wearing the same plain red shirt, and yet no one in that hangar would ever again make the mistake of thinking she was nobody. She turned her head and looked at Captain Hollis, and when she spoke, it was quiet, almost gentle, pitched for him and not for the room. "I go by Eagle 6, she said. "You can let go of my arm now." He already had. He stood with his empty hand still half raised, in the center of a hangar full of Marines at rigid attention, with a dead phone on the floor recording nothing but the high steel of the roof, and there was nowhere on the entire flight line for him to look. He looked at the deck. The deck was the only place left. Colonel Lyon walked the length of the bay through the standing ranks, and he did not hurry, and the only sounds were his footsteps and the distant idle of the apron and somewhere far off the cooling tick of the staff car. He stopped in front of the woman, and he brought his hand up in a salute, and he held it a beat longer than he had to, longer than custom asked, and she returned it. And for just a moment, the two of them were not in this hangar at all, but on a ramp 10 years and 7,000 miles away. Then he lowered his hand and turned, and the warmth went out of his face, and he looked at the captain. "Captain Hollis," Lyon said. His voice was level, which was worse than shouting. "You're relieved. As of this moment. Report to the group office and wait for me there. Master Sergeant Ferraro will see that you find it." "Sir," Hollis said. It came out cracked, barely a word at all. "Sir, I didn't know who she—" "That," said the colonel, "is the entire problem. You decided you knew. You looked at a woman in a red shirt, and you decided she was nothing. And you put your hands on her, and you did it in front of your Marines and a camera. And the only thing you got right all morning is that this is a flight line, and people who do not belong on it should be removed." He let that sit, and it sat, in front of everyone. It just turned out the person who didn't belong was you. Report to the group office, Captain. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this story find the people who need it. The duty NCO that Hollis himself had called for arrived at the doors then. A young sergeant come at a jog, summoned to walk a civilian off the flight line, and instead found a relieved captain to escort and a hangar full of Marines at attention, and a colonel and an incoming commander standing where the joke used to be. The sergeant took one look and squared himself and waited, because there are some rooms a young man walks into and understands instantly that the only correct thing to do is stand still and be quiet. The two lieutenants stood at attention with their faces gray. Cassidy looked as though he might be sick. The hangar stayed up, holding its attention, every Marine in it watching the slow business of consequence move across the floor. Colonel Lyon turned, unhurried, and let his eyes travel down the line of young officers who had laughed, who had circled, who had fed the captain his lines. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. "You two," he said to the lieutenants, "were there. You watched a senior officer be manhandled toward a door, and you laughed, and one of you filmed it. You will think very hard tonight about what kind of officers you intend to be, because this morning you showed me, and I did not care for the answer." Cassidy's throat worked. "Sir," he managed, and Lyon let it stand without reply, which was its own kind of sentence. The sergeant major, at the colonel's shoulder, was looking at the lieutenants the way a sergeant major looks at a thing that is going to be his problem for a long while, and the lieutenants felt that look land on them and understood that the consequences in this hangar had only begun to be counted. And it was the woman who ended it. "Colonel," Lieutenant Colonel Marin Asher said quietly, and she stepped close to Lyon so the words stayed between them. The two of them turned half away from the room. "He's young. A relief is enough. I'd rather he learned something from this than be buried by it." A faint, tired warmth moved at the edge of her mouth, gone almost before it arrived. "Somebody taught me, once, when I had more mouth than sense. I wasn't always quiet either, sir. You remember." She glanced at the frozen captain, and there was no triumph in it, no cruelty, only the long view of a person who had paid for her own lessons in full and knew exactly what they cost and exactly what they were worth. "Teach him. Don't bury him. The Marine Corps spent a lot of money making him a pilot. Get something back for it." Lyon held her eyes for a moment, and then he nodded. Once, slowly, the way men nod when they are agreeing to be better than their anger. "Carry on, Eagle 6, he said, and there was something in his voice that the whole hangar heard, a respect so plain it needed no rank to carry it. "Your squadron's waiting on you. They've been waiting a while. I think they just figured out it was worth the wait. She gave the hangar a single quiet, "As you were," and the breath went out of the room, and the Marines came down off attention slow and changed, every one of them looking at the woman in the red shirt, as if seeing her for the first time, which they were. Ferraro caught her eye across the bay as the floor came back to life, and the old master sergeant gave her the smallest nod, and she gave it back, and 10 years closed up between them in that one exchange. Two people who had been on the same flight line in the same Red Dawn, and had each, in their own way, carried it ever since. That evening, when the heat had gone amber, and the apron had emptied, and the great doors of the hangar were rolled half down against the dusk, Marin Asher came back alone. She walked to the jet at the end of the row, the one nearest the doors, and she set her clipboard down on a rolling toolbox, and she stood for a long while looking up at the long, clean lines of it in the failing light. The squadron she was about to take, her squadron in a few days' time. 12 jets and 300 Marines and a hangar full of young men and women who would each, sooner or later, learn the things she had learned, some of them gently, and some of them the way Hollis had learned them, and a few of them, God help them, the way she had learned them, on a night with troops in contact and a voice going silent in the back seat. Then she reached up and laid one hand flat against the cold metal of the fuselage, the way you lay a hand on the shoulder of someone you have not seen in a long time, and she stayed like that, and her lips moved, and the only word that anyone might have caught, had anyone been there to catch it, was a name. "Cleared hot, Silas," she said softly, to the empty back seat that had been empty for 10 years. "Still flying, still got it. Wish you could see this one. You'd hate the paperwork." Her hand pressed flatter against the metal. "I'll take care of them. I promise I'll take care of them." She stood with the deep, settled stillness that the boy had mistaken for weakness, the operator's stillness, the stillness of a person who carries a weight in silence and has long since stopped expecting anyone to help her lift it, and has learned that the carrying itself is a kind of honoring, and would not put it down now, even if she could. The amber light slid down the airframe. Out beyond the doors, the last of the day burned off the apron in long copper streaks, and after a while she lifted her hand from the metal and picked up her clipboard, and walked out into the dusk to go and command her squadron. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.